Aside from emperors, czars, and kings, there was another caste in history that we rarely discuss: empresses, czars, and queens. However, women have never been represented in history books. The reason is straightforward. Political systems were thought to be divinely inspired under monarchs. God's representative on earth was an emperor or king. Women, who are still denied equal political participation even today, could not have been expected to be God's representation on earth. Thousands of years ago, however, there were women who had a significant impact on the fate of their country. These women's authority did not originate from God's decree or noble blood. Their brilliance and talent propelled them to the top and gave them a voice in their country's governance. One of these ladies, Theodora, had a significant impact on the history of Byzantium, one of the most deeply established empires. Let's dig deeper into her narrative. Theodora's precise birthplace is unknown. However, other sources claim she was Syrian, Greek, or perhaps Black Sea-born, Acacius. Her father was a bear keeper who competed in the hippodrome races in Constantinople, while her mother was an actress and dancer. Following her father's death and her mother's advanced age, Theodora began to participate in performances with her two sisters, becoming a name that drew everyone's attention with her beauty and agile dances. According to the Byzantine historian Procopius, Theodora began working in a brothel in Constantinople at a young age, giving herself to low-class clientele. Subsequently, she went on stage. Being an actress at the time meant both doing obscene deeds on stage and providing sexual services off stage. Theodora supported herself by her theatrical and sexual abilities. Procopius claims that Theodora made a name for herself with her obscene image of Leda and the Swan. Modern feminist sources, on the other hand, characterize her as a private party comic who became famed for her humor. At the age of 16, Theodora accompanied the Syrian governor Hecebolus to North Africa. She stayed with them for around 4 years before returning to Constantinople. She stayed in Alexandria on her way back to Byzantium after being mistreated and abandoned by Hecebolus. It is reported that she met Timothy III, Patriarch of Alexandria, here and was impressed by his understanding of Christianity. When Theodora returned to Constantinople in 522, she abandoned her previous life and found work as a wool spinner in a cottage near the palace. Her beauty, cleverness, playful nature, and ability to draw attention wherever she went drew Justinian I's interest, and he desired to marry her, but Justinian couldn't marry Theodora because he was heir to his uncle, Emperor Justin I, and because Roman law barred state officials from the time of Constantine I from marrying actresses. Even though she adored her nephew, Justin I's wife, Empress Euphemia, was opposed to the marriage, but Justinian had a thing for Theodora. The ban was abolished in 525, shortly after the Empress's death, and Justinian and Theodora married. They had a daughter by this point. When Justinian I died shortly after his wife in 527, the empire passed to Justinian I, and Theodora became Empress. Theodora had become the formal wife of a Byzantine senator, rather than a mistress. She quickly rose to prominence in Byzantine society due to her quick wit and inventiveness. Neither history books nor Byzantines could distinguish Justinian and Theodora. Justinian I was crowned Emperor of Byzantium exactly 2 years after their marriage. Theodora gradually conquered the rigid social caste structure and rose to the position of Empress. The Byzantine Empire and its people entered a new age. Justinian's reign is regarded as the golden age of early Byzantium. With the emperor and his wife Theodora on the throne, the preceding years' uncertainty gave way to confidence, and a synthesis of ancient and Christian culture emerged. The reconquest of the West will always be associated with Justinian's rule, as will the creation of Hagia Sophia, one of the finest and best emblems of the Byzantine Empire. During his reign, the creative and intellectual scenes developed, and he drafted Roman law, which is still the foundation of the legal systems of European countries, thanks to the vivid depictions of the historian Procopius. The emperors, and even the Empress, personality has been the topic of considerable debate. Several novels and films. Theodora became Empress of Eastern Rome after her marriage to Justinian. Theodora was usually by Justinian's side in his ideas and political strategies, and she took part in the state councils after becoming Empress. One of the first things she did was proclaim war on brothels, keeping in mind her recent history. Theodora vowed to do everything she could to advance women's rights. She founded a convent for women forced into prostitution after closing the brothels. Then she gained the hearts of the people by erecting hospitals, churches, and convents across the city and regions. Theodora rose to become one of the empire's most prominent and important ladies. She was a powerful presence in both social and political circles. She attended Senate meetings, personally oversaw decisions, and drafted legislation. According to some historians, she even intervened in the Byzantine army. Justinian referred to Theodora as my negotiator as a result. Theodora, who had her own palace, private quarters, and the imperial seal, demonstrated how important she was to the administration during the Nika uprising in 532. One of the bloodiest occurrences in Byzantine history is the Nika uprising. Horse racing, an entertainment similar to gladiatorial entertainment in Roman culture, was one of the most entertaining events in Byzantium, attracting thousands of spectators. The teams would fight to the death in front of the people, divided into two primary groups, the blues and the greens. The races were also politically significant. Politically, the supporter groups represented by the teams were firmly divided. The rebellion began in January 532 at a chariot race in the Hippodrome, when the blues and greens banded together against the emperor and the state, cheering and yelling "Nika, Nika, Nika." The crowd began insulting Justinian before attacking the palace. The city was severely damaged during the 5-day siege. The rebels intended to depose the dynasty and install Hecebolus as emperor. This was owing to Byzantium's economic difficulties and theological disputes. Hecebolus was well liked by both the Senate and the populace. The uprising was bloody. Justinian expected to lose and attempted to depart Constantinople with his ministers. That's when Theodora delivered a speech that changed the course of the empire. Theodora spoke out against fleeing the palace at a government council meeting, emphasizing the value of dying as a monarch rather than living in exile or escaping, noting that the royal purple is the noblest shroud. Emperor Justinian gathered 30,000 rioters in the Hippodrome at the end of the disturbances and had them massacred. Williams of Fire's "Lend Me Your Ears" speech is one of history's most powerful, and Theodora interrupted everyone. The emperor and his aides were still plotting their escape. "My lords, the situation is too serious for me to follow the custom that a woman has no right to speak in a council of men. Those whose lives are so dangerously threatened must abandon tradition and consider the wisest course of action. It is impossible for one born into this world not to die, but it is absolutely unacceptable for one who rules to live as a fugitive. If you want to save yourself, sir, there is no difficulty. We are rich, the sea is right there, and your ships are ready. But even if you go to safety, won't you one day wonder if you should have stayed? As for me, I stand by the saying that the royal purple is the noblest shroud." Everyone, even Justinian, was persuaded by Theodora's important speech. As a result, Justinian crushed the insurgents with royal soldiers headed by commanders Mundus and Belisarius. Hypatius was similarly assassinated at Theodora's request, despite the fact that he had not been declared emperor of his own volition. Because of her, Justinian was able to save his throne, demonstrating Theodora's might and intelligence. The rebels were treated with no mercy by Justinian and Theodora. That day, 30,000 people were killed. Justinian and Theodora renovated and reconstructed Constantinople after the insurrection, transforming it into a splendid city. They constructed bridges, arches, and more than 25 churches. The devastated Hagia Sophia was reconstructed and became an even more stunning edifice than before. Justinian directed that the most magnificent architectural items be collected from all provinces and used in the Hagia Sophia. Columns and marbles gathered from the ruins of ancient towns, like Hespendos, Ephesus, and Tarsus, also contributed to the church's quick construction. Theodora, according to Procopius, was exceedingly conscientious about palace decorum. However, under Justinian and Theodora, even the patricians were obliged to wait in a stifling room like slaves for a long period before appearing before the Empress. Some, when summoned days later, would come in great fright before Theodora and then flee. In the Byzantine Empire, Theodora is credited for strengthening women's rights and religious tolerance. It was because of her that laws outlawing the trafficking of women were enacted. It was because of her that rape was punishable by death. She also made numerous modifications in divorce legislation that favored women. It granted women physical custody of their children. He also protected divorced women's property rights. Although Justinian himself was Orthodox, he granted Monophysites religious protection within the palace gates. Justinian and Theodora were never parents. Theodora, on the other hand, had a child before marrying the emperor. She married off her relatives and her child to persons from Byzantium's upper class. She never forgot the capital, which had been destroyed during the uprising. She rebuilt Constantinople. She transformed it into one of the most magnificent cities the world has ever seen by constructing libraries, monuments, aqueducts, and churches. She rewrote the history of Byzantine architecture. The Basilica of San Vitale at Ravenna, Italy, which was finished a year before Theodora's death, contains mosaics of Justinian and herself. In 539, Theodora rebuilt the ruined Libyan city of Olbia, which is why the city was named Theodoria after her. The city now has two remaining Byzantine churches. One was created as a museum, while the other was unearthed in the 1950s by Richard Goodchild. The church contained 50 mosaics, of which only the ground floor remains. Theodora is shown rebuilding and beautifying the city in these mosaics. Theodora died in 548 at the age of 48, most likely from cancer. Despite the fact that the term cancer is not utilized in the original texts, the accounts point to this conclusion. Her remains were interred in the Church of the Apostles after Theodora died. Justinian married no one.